All right. Welcome back to the Life on Purpose podcast. A really important part of hosting this show and something that's very important to me is being able to share people's stories. And I've had several guests on this show who have written memoirs, written books, who have, shared their stories with me, and then I get to share stories with my audience. Today is no different. Today I have Martin Sawa on my show, who wrote a poignant, beautiful book about triumph and tragedy, and kind of overcoming. And it was kind of an American dream story, but pumped up just a little bit more than that. So Martin Sawa's career spanned 30 years as a commercial real estate broker, operator, and developer. He negotiated numerous high-profile transactions in San Francisco and Los Angeles, culminating in a $400 million development project. Martin left the business to write in 2013. After completing several screenplays and essays, he committed to a memoir, The Other Side of Success, Money and Meaning in the Golden State, a raw and truthful accounting of his personal life. The Other Side of Success is a tale of the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, an immigrant story about an incredibly driven man who started with nothing and one who pulled himself out of addiction and personal tragedy to arrive at a state of peace, which I think is kind of what we, so many of us go through. So welcome to the show, Martin. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Brandy, and thanks so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So, that kind of gives just a little bit of an overview of your book, but, like we were talking before, there is so much to your life that I had a hard time deciding which direction I wanted to take this conversation. You started, your parents were immigrants. So you kind of have this American dream story, kind of the traditional American dream story. Can you touch on just a little bit what that meant to you or what that meant to your parents, for you to come over from Ukraine and to have this American dream, and how that's changed, how the American dream has changed over time, over the last few decades?
My parents were born in these tiny villages near a city in Western Ukraine. And they grew up in the years before and during the Second World War. Mm-hmm. So they lived under Stalin and Hitler. And it doesn't get much worse than that. Right. They fled the Red Army, who was repelling the Nazi forces back towards Germany, and then lived day to day dodging death in Europe for probably a year or two, before being put in a displaced persons camp, where they lived for 4 years in Austria until they were allowed to immigrate legally to the United States. So I was conceived in the DP camp, but birthed on US soil, and grew up in a small town in the rural Midwest, and then went to college and moved to California after college, and that's where I lived most of my professional life.
And given your portfolio of work, you were a very, very, very driven person from the very beginning. What was it? Was it from that immigration story? Was it from, the history of your parents, and being here? Did that have anything to do with how driven that you were to have a successful life?
It taught me resiliency, and the fact that life can always be worse. When my parents arrived here, they had 2 suitcases, and my older sister, Charlotte, who was then 2 years old,
Mhm.
And the worst of what they expected here would be the better than the best of what they had left behind.
Wow.
So from that perspective, and they endured hardships. We were kind of isolated in this town. They kind of worked as free labor for a while till they caught on. I didn't really speak English well till I started in grade school.
Yeah.
But there was always, and the biggest part, the immigrant experience, I think, from any country is that the kids will do better than the parents,
Yeah.
and that education and self-reliance are key. So I just grew up with the mentality that it wasn't an option to not keep moving as aggressively as I could in a forward direction.
And you did. You really did. Kind of reading your story, it wasn't quite clear to you from the beginning what it is that you would want to do with your life. You dabbled in a few different careers, right? Before getting into development and real estate and all of that. Door-to-door salesman. You started, the very basics. What do you attribute to kind of this restlessness that led you into such a high stakes career?
Well, frankly, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Do we all?
I've reinvented myself in general, and then even in the world of commercial real estate a number of times. So I don't know. I didn't grow up with a passion to do a specific thing, like be a doctor or a lawyer, or even be in commercial real estate or whatever. But I always wanted to prove that I could do it to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate and I went to high school at a Jesuit boarding school, which happened to be located on the outskirts of town. And I was a town student, my parents couldn't afford the tuition, so I had to work my way to high school.
Yeah.
But I learned more then than I ever did in college or later in life, just from an intellectual standpoint.
Right.
And that was very valuable because there were kids from other states and even other countries, some who became famous later on. And it showed me I could compete sort of with the best minds that were around me. And then it was like moving to Chicago and making it on my own. And then it was moving to California and making it. And so there was always something that just kept me moving and still does. I'm never going to retire. I can't sit still. And that's, I think, just the way my personality is.
So you are in a way pretty intellectually driven, kind of trying to keep your mind sharp and always learning and always experiencing. I mean, you've had very diverse relationships, you've had very diverse friendships, you've had a very diverse career. How important was that in your life, with your friendships and your marriages and your relationships? Because you were married to a Native American, African American, and how was that? How did that enrich your life? How were those relationships enriching to you? And how do you see us as a nation now dealing with kind of these diverse relationships and situations?
Well, the fact that you could even say the word race and have a discussion on the topic,
right. As you can see, I'm trying to be very delicate.
Put you ahead of 90% of the population.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough times. It's hard to have these conversations, but I found it a beautiful part of your book that, you celebrated these relationships and it was so refreshing for me. And so it was something that I felt was important to kind of touch on and to hear from you how enriching that was, because you lived in a very diverse communities in California during a time where diversity was exploding. And we don't see that right now. It's kind of being stamped down a little bit.
Yeah, when I moved to California, this was in 1973, to date myself. And the world back then, I sold door to door in Chicago in 1968 amid the riots and the Democratic National Convention and all the crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So I knew kind of what city life, I got to know city life,
Yeah.
and was no longer the country bumpkin. And when I moved to California, it was I lived primarily in Oakland and the surrounding communities, what they call the East Bay, right across the bay from San Francisco. And Oakland would today be described as a diverse community, but it was diverse back then as well. You had the Black population soon to exceed the white population. You had refugees from Vietnam. You had immigrants, legal and illegal, from Mexico. You had a Chinatown that had been there for many years.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of a smorgasbord. But still dating interracially. People even then in the Bay Area, as far as the press, kind of patted themselves on the back for being open-minded and that. But believe me, they're no different than anyone else. They could just hide it better. And so it wasn't the risk of 10 years earlier if you lived in certain states before a loving v. Virginia, where you could actually get thrown in the pokey.
Right.
But there was still, social risk, even in Oakland. And but my philosophy, and I don't know if it was because I kind of grew up as an outsider in this little town or what, but I had a pretty open mind. I wanted to experience the best of what life had to offer in any aspect. And if that meant dating interracially, then it's risk and reward. So my first wife was Native American, and then my second wife was African American, and finally my third and present wife is African American. And what I found out is that you need to put skin in the game. And this is a central theme of the book in business and in life.
Yeah.
If you have nothing at risk, if you have no downside and can say or do anything without penalty, or conversely, if you take the chance and succeed, then you'll reach higher heights. So I put skin in the game, and that meant I married my first wife. She had 2 stepchildren. She soon became pregnant. I had a family now, mouths to feed, etc.
Right.
And at that, and now I began to meet her extended family, which was huge, and participate in their functions. And she would learn about my life. And the key was always that the person across from me, whether business client and I've dealt with people from all over the world, in an intimate personal relationship or friendship, you look at the person and you feel neither superior nor inferior to them. And that's key. Because where you get the imbalance is where one side feels superior or inferior. And that doesn't remain static through history. It changes from decade to decade.
Yeah, that is a very interesting point too, that it hasn't remained the same, in that one group may feel inferior or superior, but it's a very fluid thing through time. Yeah.
Yeah, and it becomes not the cause, but a justification for, it's always what's your end game. You want to talk about race, or you're really talking about breaking down an existing society and reimagining it as a collectivist or other utopia.
Yeah.
And you'll do anything to achieve that end.
Yeah.
And the race demarcation is just the means to an end. So,
which is terrifying and sad, because there's a lot of carnage that goes with that.
as my parents experienced directly.
Right.
Hitler and Stalin,
you
you
kind
can
of
get
have
it from
that.
the left, you can get it from the right, but it goes in one direction. And we seem not to avoid anything in this country because just of the material luxury that people live in relative to human history. They have no idea.
And what
They have
is it
no idea.
about? I think we always like to think that we would learn our lessons, or we would learn the lessons of others, and that it can never happen to us, and it can never happen to our country, this country. What is blinding us to that reality that was not that far long ago? I mean, this is your parents that went through something so horrific, and it's knocking at our door.
Believe me, I've thought a lot about this.
I'm sure you have.
And it's like 50 years ago, I feel like I went against the grain.
Yeah.
And now I'm going against the grain in the exact opposite direction.
Yeah.
And, I'd watch these Goebbels propaganda films, or I'd read the Soviet playbook. And it's mind-boggling how you think, how could people be that stupid? And then you're seeing it in the present day.
Yeah, and it's
I mean, part of it is technology and the media, and that's why I don't watch television other than I like crime shows and game shows. So my wife and I, we can sit there and not argue about anything, but what you see are video and audio images that, if repeated enough times, psychologically, and believe me, the largest tech companies have spent billions on psychological testing and manipulation. That's the business they're in. So, and the average person, and I think people are generally decent, although they can be easily swayed. The average person believes what they see, and the only antidote is to spend time and energy to read and study and get a balanced perspective. And for the people today where one or both of the spouses are working, they have kids, they just don't have the time. And so they're forced at certain times to make a decision, and they react to what they see on their screen, or to what friends tell them, or whatever. Or they know what is, quote, right. And they don't want to avoid, they want to avoid controversy. They want to avoid conflict, particularly in business. If you have your own business, right? Right. You don't want to, historically, you didn't care what the person on the other side of the trade, what their race, religion, anything else was.
No.
And you invested, and you knew who your market was. But today, it's this mindset has penetrated the market. It's penetrated the schools. It's everywhere, and
Kind of like
it
a
starts
cancer.
off. It
Yeah.
starts off always with good intentions.
Yeah.
Okay, it always starts with good intentions. But again, the end game is not to where it starts. So the stakes get getting raised and it gets crazier and crazier. And the child will come home and tell them something, and they say they learn about history, and the parents will say, well, that's just patently untrue. That's factually untrue. And
Yeah.
the child will start crying, and and then they say, well, yeah, I don't want to cause much of a fuss. Maybe this will go away, or gee, if I speak up, maybe they'll say, well, you can go to another school, and then my kid's not going to get into Harvard, all these things. But it's if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything, as the cliche goes.
And there's a lot at stake for a lot of us too, especially when it comes to our children, because they're in their most impressionable years. And I would like to think that I would like to think that, they could be exposed to some of the same people and ideas that you were in your youth that drove you to kind of this intellectual height of kind of questioning or yeah, like questioning. I guess that's kind of one of the biggest things is that they're not allowed to question anything. And I think that's one of the things, in our house, we question everything, you know? And so they get used to doing it here, but then are kind of just stamped down and stamped down and stamped down at school. And it's really disheartening. And to think that it starts at this very basic young level is a little scary.
Well, I have two grandchildren, 10 and 15. They're smart kids. And, I worked with them just like I did with my daughter, who's, runs Native American health clinic in the Bay Area and has been on the front lines with COVID. So she is overwhelmed. My son is a social worker for a private foundation. So try to help as much as I can. But I come back to my education. And when I said I went to this Jesuit school, how fortunate I was, because I got what was then called a classical liberal education. And most people today don't know what that means, or they hear the word liberal. But the word, what liberal means today is, just a distortion of its original meaning. And so the whole Jesuit philosophy, they're sort of like the intellectual order, the Catholic Church, was always to question, how do you think? And, when you write, how do you write? And you question everything. I mean, this was a Catholic education, but as a freshman, they had me reading Sartre and Camus and existential philosophy. So there is no easy way. You have to educate yourself. And if you can't put in that time, then you have to find people who you trust implicitly, who you really feel have your best interest at heart, and just ask them flat out whether they think about this or that, and what is the reason. And then you have to stand up. Because if you don't stand up, if you're afraid to speak up, then we're like Berlin in 1934. And I'm not exaggerating.
Well, and it feels very much again, I can't even imagine what that is like, but I know in my own daily life, it's very stress inducing because I personally love conversations. I love talking to people who maybe don't agree with me or I don't agree with them, but we're not there anymore. We can no longer have these conversations where we disagree or we share ideas and either come out with some middle ground or still disagree, but we can still be friends. We're not there anymore. And it's disheartening. It's scary. it's a really stress-inducing place to be. It's a really stress-inducing way to live because it's very isolating.
You're absolutely right. And again, it's not easy. We being people who lived in this country
Sure.
over the last 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean everybody. Now, of course, there are always people at the margins, but across races, across ethnicities, in terms of the availability of opportunity to succeed,
Right.
it's never been better. And the material comforts we enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
even kings didn't have, 100 years ago.
Right.
So yeah, it's tough, but would you rather be in the Congo, the so-called Democratic Republic,
No, and I think
which has been
being,
at civil war for 25 years, and where half the soldiers
yeah,
are boys under the age of 15, drugged with alcohol or narcotics? So it's relative.
and being in this position to have so much to lose, I don't know if people realize how much we have to lose.
It's more than they imagine. And I talked to a colleague, we talk a lot, and he likened it to having like a near-death experience. It's like you're, 10, 15 feet above the operating table, and there you are. And it looks real, but this can't be happening. And I thought that was a good way to express it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so sorry. I've got this tickle in my throat. So I want to ask you, I want to kind of go backwards to this idea of the American dream. How have you seen it change over the last few decades?
The American dream, it's almost capable of infinite definition. But some of the key aspects I think everyone would agree on is that one, with hard work and persistence and some measure of luck, because the achievement of your dream is never guaranteed, and that's an integral part of it. You can achieve success. You can improve your life over what you had from wherever you came from. And the American dream is usually spoken in the context of an immigrant's experience. You can better yourself, and you can live in a society where you can enjoy freedom of choice and freedom of speech and other freedoms that, depending on the time and place, generally are not as available in other parts of the world. So that's the uniqueness of the American dream. Today, and believe me, this isn't just the result of things that have happened in the last year, 5 years, or 10 years. This has been going on for 50 years. And I thought when the Soviet Union collapsed, that would kind of put the end to just this misguided belief that a collectivist society, whether you brand it socialist or whatever you call it, where you don't have the freedoms and you have a government telling you what to do. And if you don't toe the party line, you get banished to Siberia or killed. That's just the way it is. And we saw what happened in the 20th century, but memory is short. I went back to Ukraine for the first time about 10 years ago when I was 60. There were a number of reasons explained in the book why I didn't go earlier, but I figured I only had a few more years left, because all the living witnesses, and they were now in their 90s, from the war years, they could still tell me direct, and I could tell you, yes, this is what happened. This is really what happened. Okay. This whole cultural revolution, or whatever you want to call it, is particularly remarkable because, again, the level of material satisfaction that we enjoy.
Right.
And so if the worst thing you could do to a young person is to take away their gadget. And they live in this imaginary world where, you know, what they see Survivor on TV. They believe that's what survival means, or in all these images. And believe me, has been studied, and the people who are doing this are extremely clever. And now it's sort of coalesced around race, and most people, if you're so-called white in these categories, if you look at the census definitions, are totally absurd.
Right.
They have no meaning other than political or in the allocation of resources.
Sure.
And they change from decade to decade. And so now but it's critical to achieve your ultimate ends. You have to have, like in a good story, you have to have opposition. You have to have the villain, the evil person, because without the conflict, it's not a great story. And so now the tags have been flipped.
Sure.
And people look at their gadgets and believe what they see to be true, and live an unparalleled material life. And they don't appreciate what can happen, because that takes time and concentration of thought and reading and studying. And this is the way it's gone on since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
So nothing new.
Right. These shifts in power. Yeah, like the opposition, you know, there's always somebody seeking power over others. And I think where we've gotten to is we no longer question what we see or what we hear or what we know to be true. And I think that's, you know, a major struggle in our house. Okay, this is what it feels to me to be true. My intuition, my spiritual teachings, but somebody's telling me that that's a lie, that I shouldn't trust my own feelings. And I think that's what we're all kind of in this spiritual crisis a little bit.
Yeah, there's several things at work here. When I counsel people, if they ask me to, or not counsel, I just render my opinions.
Yeah.
If I were them, but then I always am, I'm not you, and you have to figure things out for yourself. But the first question I always ask them is, what do you believe to be true?
Mm-hmm.
From the top down, okay? If you believe that a life starts at 0 and ends at 0, then you're going to live your life in a very specific way. And so you need to be true to yourself, because unhappiness, I think, results from when your core values and your beliefs in what I call the world of the unseen, which encompasses religion and spirituality and the metaphysical, when those aren't in alignment with your actions in the material world of driving for success, of starting your own business, doing what you have to do to succeed in the material world, you can find success and still be an asshole. So there has to be an alignment of the views. So the first question is, what do you believe? Do you believe in a personal God? Do you believe in a next life? Do you believe in the power of prayer? If they say no, well, I don't care. All I tell them is, all right, then that's your worldview. And this is how one would act in accord with that worldview. But if you believe there's more to life than meets the eye, then you have to find your core values and constantly defend them. Or reevaluate them and change. But it's a constant process, and defend yourself against people who are very clever. And the whole dialogue now with critical theory, critical race, this whole thing is a fraud, and almost anybody with any minimal mental capacity could ascertain that in about 5 minutes. But it's where you can define truth, even factual truth, as a social construct. That means you can change the argument at any time to what you want it to be. So the defense is to shut it down or not have it, because there is no dialogue.
Yeah.
Okay, there is no dialogue. But if you can't even figure that out, then it's problematic.
So at the very core, we have reached a spiritual crisis. And when I was reading your book, I saw kind of this evolution of your spiritual growth throughout the whole thing. And it was kind of how I read it. And again, tell me if I'm wrong. Kind of the point that you found peace after having all of this material success, these high stakes deals, this successful career in California, all of this, when you found peace, it was when your spirituality, when that all fell into place, is when I felt your peace in the book. You wrote, there was a part that you wrote, and I don't remember, I can't quote it directly, but it was, you kind of, these businessmen, you can do questionable things in business and not think a thing of it, because you think the other people are responsible adults, can handle your, misdeeds every once in a while. And business can be like that. If you get away with something long enough, it's just fine. It's part of the business. But how can you do those things in business if you have a core belief system that tells you that those things maybe go against your moral code?
That's I'm actually just starting to put down notes for what might be a next book. Mm-hmm. And this deals with just this: what is the process?
Yeah.
And I believe you can find success as most people conceive it.
Yeah.
And technically, I see it just as the setting of tangible goals and achieving them, and then raising the stakes. Or if you don't achieve it, you reevaluate, autocorrect, set a new goal. Mm-hmm. But it's in the material world, and the yardsticks are money, possessions, right? Mm-hmm. Even if it's your home, you could, if you treat that as an investment and everything, you're just caught up in that world, and you're not going to find meaning. You're not going to find happiness, although I don't believe happiness is an end. I believe it's an occasional byproduct of a life well lived.
Yeah.
But you're not going to find meaning. You're not going to identify your core values. You're not going to do that in the business world, or on your job, or anything else in the material world, which again, where success is measured tangibly. You can measure it, right?
Yeah.
I made so much this year, I want to make so much next year, right? Or I got promoted to VP in my job. Now next year I want to be promoted to EVP or whatever. You're not going to find meaning here. You have to find it in the world of the unseen. And then you have to continually correct your actions to bring it in alignment. So as you chase your dream, mm-hmm. you do it in a way that's authentic to you. And that's very hard. And that's
absolutely
what I'm wrestling with right now.
There's not much of that going on. And I don't think that we hold other people accountable for their misdeeds in the business that we may operate in, if that makes sense. I think it's, again, kind of this, like I said before, this lack of a spiritual core. Where did we lose it? And I think in the book you mentioned that, it was kind of in the 1960s that we kind of started falling away from, our religious beliefs or our practices. So this has been a long time coming of kind of just shedding our morals, our core belief systems, our spirituality, our religiosity, all of it. How do you see that?
Well, I've had some direct experience, again, as I call it, skin in the game.
Yeah.
This is something I've lived. It's not something I read about in books, although I did that as well. So I lived in the Bay Area, Oakland, San Francisco, and then also in Los Angeles. And this is the epicenter of technology, innovation. California, over these 50 years, became essentially a one-party state. And the largest cities in the state are one-party cities. Mm-hmm. Secularization, which has affected everyone, no matter where they live. Loss of religiosity. All these things have contributed to today, where it's hard to even have a discussion. It's hard to have a discussion because the whole church state, all these things have been distorted in favor of what I think fundamentally in the book, I use expression from one commentator called techno-secularism. Mm-hmm. Gee, if I can just get enough material things, or and it's the big ego versus the little ego. If I can gratify myself, so I'm going to take yoga classes, but I'm going to sit in a room at 120 degrees, and I have no idea how yoga started or its religious moorings. So everything is divorced and is material. And with this unprecedented technology, and again, being able to feed the ego, staying on your gadget, taking selfies, it just feeds into that part of the human psyche.
That part, actually, I highlighted that part from the book because it stuck out so much to me. You said one commentator dubbed this phenomenon techno-secularism, which has an ethical vision that focuses on healthful living, self-fulfillment, and avoiding the struggles of human life and the inevitability of death. In terms of material comfort and amazing gadgets, the average citizen enjoyed a lifestyle previously unavailable to kings. Why worry about God? And that was that was so poignant to me because, where is there room for?
Well, it's a compelling message. I mean, look at your business, right? Yeah. Nutrition. You want people who would argue, be as healthy as you can be. Yeah. You know what I mean? But even there, you're still in that world of time and space, mm-hmm. that the physical, natural world. Right. And you can't find meaning in that world. You can succeed. And even in a business, you give 15% of your profits, to some charity or something. Mm-hmm. Even there, it's you have to find it in that other world. And so if that other world is unknown to you or foreign, or you understand it, but don't adopt practices that strengthen your resolve in that world, then you're where most people find themselves today. That's my personal opinion.
What's really interesting is many of the clients that I see, because I don't necessarily operate just in kind of that world of nutrition, but kind of lifestyle, as in my lifestyle has gotten me to a place in my health that is not so good. So where can I figure out what's hurting me? How can I change those habits and feel better? And what I found is so many don't have that spiritual connection to themselves, to their families, to something outside of themselves. and are looking for something to fill that void. And so you fill it with activities, you fill it with, stressful events, you fill it with work, to where you're not nurturing yourself. So I'll have them kind of, get out of your own head, figure out what your practice can be. And I've seen like these transformations that we're all looking to fill this hole. And again, my opinion is that it's this whole of spirituality, this religiosity that we've let go of as a society, and that a lot of us are missing completely.
But again, in business, if you have your own business, you're cowed into not bringing that in because you're not supposed to. You see?
Correct.
And that's so this takes personal courage.
Yeah.
And at times, and believe me, I talk to people every day where it may mean the loss of your job, or a diminishment of the business you worked so hard to develop, or having to take your kids out of school and homeschool, or put them where might be perceived as, not as good a school. But it takes personal courage. Without that, you acquiesce, and that's what the people who are running the show count on you to do. They're either going to count on you to feel guilty because of what they show you, and if you don't take the actions that they insist you take, then they'll become an internet troll. They'll try to ruin do whatever. And so people are afraid, and they hope it'll go away. But it won't go away. And the only thing I can predict with 101% accuracy is that it'll get worse.
Right.
That's the only thing I can predict with 101% accuracy. It will get worse. So
I said something to somebody the other day. There's things that I've had to do or had to participate in the last year and a half that felt like going against my religion. And if more of us felt that strongly about our convictions and where we stand on things, and had this spirituality, religiosity, wouldn't more of us be able to stand up against these things? Because you can't go against your religion. It's just like number one rule. I don't know how else to express it any more clearly than that.
Well, no, that's the way it needs to be expressed. Yeah. The expression, the knowledge, people know. Yeah. People know. Yeah. Just like you meet someone, in the first 5-10 seconds, you of course you want to verify subsequently if it goes anywhere. Yeah. But right, people know intuitively. That's not the problem. Okay, they know intuitively right from wrong, good from evil. Mm-hmm. Some don't. They just lack the mental capacity or some other reason. Right. But they know. That's not the problem. It's to take action.
Sure.
And they're afraid. But just to give you one example.
Yeah, there's a lot to lose. Sure.
Well, how crazy things have come. Now, I'm, as you know from the book, practicing Catholic again. So I watch Robert Barron. He's Bishop Barron. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but he's active on social media. I also studied Torah with Rabbi David Wolpe of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles. So I've studied different religions, and not just reading, but doing the practice as well. And both of them are not what you would call like conservative hardliners. They built a reputation on going out and meeting with the people who have opposing views. and trying to find the middle ground and, what civilized people do. But Bishop Barron just a couple of weeks ago posted a little podcast, 8-minute podcast, where he reached out and met with the Catholic congressman. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there was a bill introduced that would simply say that live birth abortions, the word itself is meaningless, because when a baby is born and it's killed, that's infanticide.
Yeah.
And that bill couldn't get out of committee. And none of the 18 Catholic Congress people had the courage to speak out about it. And so his point was, okay, what is there to dialogue about? This has gone as far as it can. There's no, what is there to dialogue about? And that's where we are in a lot of areas. If people look at this,
enough people to
not only if you're from a religious state or Calvinism, but just from a human being, what is life, and accept this, then what is there to dialogue about?
That's really interesting. In the saddest possible way, that, I mean, what is truth then? If this truth is laid out right here in front of you, how can you go against truth and not stand up? And what does that say about you and your convictions? And I think we're all in this place, this very scary place of trying to draw that hard line of what our convictions are. And
I think for some, but I think for most, they know. They're just afraid.
Sure. And
if you're even afraid to discuss it, much less take action, coherent with your beliefs.
Yeah.
You've already told me.
Right, where you stand. Yeah.
What is there any more to think about, frankly?
It's it's a very frustrating place to be, for sure. For so many of us who have not lived through conflict. I mean, I was born in the early 80s. So my life has been very, for the most part, prosperous. I mean, there have been we lived through 9/11, which was terrifying and scary. And I think the world changed a bit from that point, actually quite a bit, but not to the point where my overall life changed. I didn't have to think about going against my convictions. This is a whole other realm to be operating in right now as an adult and an adult with children. So yeah, putting skin in the game, you're right, is extremely important. Having convictions, having a spiritual practice. And I keep going back to that because that was probably one of the more important parts of your book for me, watching that growth, because you had, what did you say? You committed to Catholicism, but what you weren't against supplementing. So like supplemental materials like Judaism and Buddhism, right? So
probably the greatest historian of the 20th century on world religions was a man named Houston Smith.
That's right.
And I say in the book, he practiced 3 or 4 different religions for 10 years each before while teaching and studying it academically to form his views. So this isn't just some graduate guy out of graduate school.
Right.
So, and he eventually he was born in China to missionary parents. And he eventually went back to the religion of his youth, but said he still studies and adopts practices from the other. He sees it as, Christianity is his main meal, but the others are like vitamin supplements. And I thought that was a good description.
Oh yeah, I loved that part. And I know I highlighted it somewhere, but there was another part you were talking about, Becker again. Born to Jewish immigrant parents, Becker helped liberate a Nazi concentration camp during the military service. He considered himself a scientist and remained an atheist for much of his career. However, in his mature writings, Becker rediscovered his belief in God. He conceded that humans couldn't think their way out of their moral dilemmas, and that genuine religion represented the highest level of meaning. So that's kind of where we are. That's where we are, kind of this where science has kind of become a religion for people. And
or climate change, or
sure,
anything else you can think of. Yeah,
sure.
because there is a hole to fill.
Right.
In Buddhism, it's called feeding the ghost.
Mm-hmm.
There's that void, and you have to fill it somehow. And
and this is what we're filling.
How you choose to do it. I think one other area we haven't touched on, but which was hugely instrumental in my life,
Mm-hmm.
is the whole topic of death.
Yes.
Okay, because as I took the liberty of reading your why posting.
Oh yeah.
And I learned that, I'm sure it's okay to share with your listeners, that
there's nothing I haven't shared on here yet.
that your father committed suicide at your age of 11, and that has a profound effect on the way a person lives their life. If they've never experienced death or really huge loss, they don't. The people who have, they're different afterwards.
Right.
And it gives you an appreciation for the finality, right. You see, because Ernest Becker, his thesis was that we are the way we are because we have this dilemma, that we're born with conscious awareness of both ourselves and in the world about us. Kind of, we know we're here.
Yeah.
Okay, in this place that makes no sense. And the only other thing we know for sure is that we're going to die. So that puts the human psyche in a real bind.
Right.
And the only way from on a secular level to work yourself out of that, and he titled his book The Denial of Death, is to try to put that thought out of your mind. And you do that by what he called immortality projects, where you invest in yourself or give your power to others, to some vision that hopefully will live forever.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So you have kids today who say, yeah, I want to, I'm all for socialism. You see what I mean? And they haven't studied history. They don't know, or the revisionist history, if they've read anything at all. And they just want to belong, or people joining a gang. They just want to belong and give their power up to someone or something.
Yeah.
Who will make them live forever, so to speak.
And it's almost like, because there is no meaning, or they haven't explored what their lives mean to them and kind of outside of themselves. Yeah. It's almost like looking for something to fill that hole to make my life mean something, when a part of that is looking outside of yourself and knowing your immortality and understanding that there's something bigger than you. It's very,
and death or extreme loss has a way of triggering that.
Yeah. If
only for a brief interval of time.
Right.
You're really forced to think about it because it affects you. Your ego, who you've kind of gratified in all these other ways. And now none of that works or matters anymore.
Yeah, it's
Now
really
what do I do?
interesting. The episode, actually, I had an episode that came out today. I did an episode with a grief counselor, and we were talking about grief. So we talked a lot about death. And we live in a world now where it's really easy to ignore your pain. You don't really have to sit with it or think about it or process it. There's a lot of distractions, and you can ignore it, for as long as you possibly can before it becomes a problem. But I think we've kind of gotten into this habit as a society of really just ignoring our feelings and kind of filling this hole with other things, um, finding other meanings, other projects, technology, whatever it is, to where we don't have to sit here and quiet. We have a hard time being quiet and sitting with our thoughts and our feelings and actually getting to the bottom of what's happening in here.
Yeah, I think, well, certainly the Buddha, many since him, have argued that the default setting in the material world is suffering. It's not great joy or happiness in the material physical world, biologically, everything we know about it. The default is suffering. It's competition for resources. It's life and death. It's
Right.
struggle.
I don't think anybody would argue with you about that today.
Yeah, because of the fact that this society was enabled to create so much wealth and material comfort for so many over the last 50 years, that people find it easier to anesthetize the suffering,
right?
With drugs, addictions, whatever it is, or their gadgets. And what they see under gadgets, they believe to be true. And of course, Facebook isn't going to tell you gee, you've watched enough now. You should go read a book and learn something.
Yeah.
And the information is out there. We all know that the tech executives,
right.
They severely limited the screen time for their kids when they
for their own families. Yeah. Right.
Well, this isn't like if you don't know something, you can go on the computer and Google it and probably get some information. It may not be good, or at least get something. So
right.
it's a lack of will. It's a lack of courage.
Yeah.
Because the level of suffering, it's not the chaotic physical suffering that you may have had in earlier centuries. But that can disappear in a nanosecond.
Sure.
It can disappear in a nanosecond.
Right.
But it's not happiness. This provides pleasure. It provides a distraction. So
yeah, it's so much to wrap your head around. And you're right. I think through great loss and grief, you are able to kind of see the world differently and really understand your own immortality. And I think it shapes your worldview, your societal view, a lot of it. So this has been such an enlightening conversation, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, especially after reading the book. Like I said, there was so many places we could have taken this, but I think we hit the nail on the head with the subjects that we talked about today, especially for my audience. So again, can you tell everybody where they can find your book and find more about you?
Yeah, the book is titled The Other Side of Success, and the subtitle is Money and Meaning in the Golden State. So it's also kind of a panorama of California history over the past 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
The easiest thing to do is just go to my website, martinsawa.com. That's martinsawa.com.
Okay.
And there with a click, you can buy the book in different formats from Amazon or the online bookseller of your choice. You can scroll and look at my social media pages or listen to some of my other archived interviews. Or you can go all the way to the bottom and send me an email, and that'd be great. I love love to hear from my readers.
That's great.
So,
That's great. Well, thank you, Martin, so much. And I will put all of that in the show notes for everybody so they can find you really easily. And I look forward to any book that you write moving forward. I think that you've got so much to share with the world, and I hope that you do.
yeah, if it's not burned in the meantime, and I'm not even being facetious, because you don't even need to go through the trouble of burning books today. You hit a
No.
keystroke and you
Right.
delete the prevalent online
Well,
content,
I've got
and
mine.
that's going on
so
too.
I will hide it. I'll put it in the safe. If anybody can't find Martin's book, give me a call. Well, thank you so much, Martin, again. And I look forward to hopefully chatting with you again in the future.
Thanks so much for having me on, Brandon.
You're welcome.